thanks so much for having a chat with me today. It's really helpful. So I'm going to be asking you all about TikTok and why you think it's kind of so popular and how it works. So firstly then, can you tell me why you think TikTok is such a popular app?
Well, I think there are lots of reasons why TikTok has found its mojo in the last couple of years. And I think it has to do with the fact that it brings together lots of really creative possibilities. I think that historically it sort of latched on to the development of the music industry and the way in which people consume music, but also the way in which music becomes popular. And of course, we've moved from a historical setting where in the past we would record our own songs from the radio, we create our own mix tracks, to then being able to be part of the environment in which music becomes popular. In the past, we were perhaps just consumers and recipients of that, but we're now active parts in that process. So as a song becomes viral on a platform like TikTok, people feel part of that historical development to becoming popular. And I think that's a really enticing aspect of what the platform allows. So a huge part of its success is that intimate connection with the music industry, where people are then taking or able to take audio tracks and then be part of their recreation through either dancing or lip syncing. So I think that's central to it. And it's become incredibly successful at connecting in with other aspects of the entertainment industry, whether it's music, film, or television. So I think that's a really fascinating part of what it does well, and probably does significantly better than any other platform. Now, if you take all those things out of the platform, there's probably something like YouTube left, or some other form of kind of video communication. But I think that the stuff that does well, and if you look at the information that TikTok provides, things like using tracks that are becoming popular, is a big part of making sure your content does well. So I think it's not just the platform itself, but it's also things like creativity, so that you can edit videos. I mean, I discovered a really nice filter yesterday that was a comic book filter, so you can transform yourself into a comic book character. And I think that creative editing is also another convergence within the platform. And all these really advanced sort of creative functions are all within this single platform, which I think no other environment does quite as well.
And do you think the pandemic has a bit of a part to play with TikTok becoming? I feel like it was already popular before the pandemic, but I feel like the pandemic kind of boosted it, really.
I think it has had an impact for sure. We know that people have spent more time on screens over the pandemic, and I think certainly it's become I mean, it's still interesting, because I think still a lot of people don't know what it is or how to use it. So there are lots of users on TikTok that are not creators, they're consumers really. So they'll just access videos and watch them rather than make their own stuff. So I think a lot of younger generations certainly became very prolific on the platform over the pandemic, and that will have been a function of the additional screen time they will have had. But I think what's happened over that period as well is an increased professionalization of the platform too. So you see lots more very established brands occupy the platform. I've noticed in the last sort of 6 months we've seen advertising elevated within the platform, so that when you log into the environment now, the first thing you see is an advert. And that's been a progressive process over the pandemic. What was also interesting was that they provided access to COVID messaging. So in actual fact, it was providing a service that people were able to access and try to understand a bit more about the pandemic and what was going on.
Yeah. And can you tell me how the kind of TikTok algorithm works?
Well, that's an incredibly good question, and I think that every article I've read about the TikTok algorithm says, first of all, says different things, and also says that it's a very well guarded secret. Now, over the last couple of years, I think partly because the platform's become much more in the public eye, there have been more transparency within the platform about how it works. But it's a combination of things, and the recipe, whilst many will say it's not a sort of magical, mysterious recipe, it is a complex recipe. So it's affected by all of the very specific behaviors that you exert within the platform as a user that affects what you see. And I think it's important to understand that as a user within TikTok, you have different layers of engagement with content. You have the people that you follow, you have the people that follow you, you have the videos that you scroll through, you have the things that you search for, you have the things that you comment on or like, and all of those behaviors, including ones that you may not think about sort of explicitly, like whether you watch a video to the end or how long you watch the video, have an impact on what it is that you see or how well a video does. And those behaviors also have a historical timeline too. So it might be that, let's say that on most of the videos that you watch, you only watch half of the duration of the video. That will affect what sorts of videos you see. It might discover that you tend to watch videos of less than 10 seconds, anything more than that, and you don't engage with the content. So then the algorithm will learn to respond to that and present you with content that's also of that sort of length. So I think the key thing that's interesting is its capacity to respond to your specific behaviors in quite a lot of detail. And then also we haven't talked about the content you create as well, or whether you don't create content. So we're talking about probably nearly at least 100 different variables that are affecting what you see and what does well. There's also talk about a beauty variable as well, that some theory is that it particularly elevates the content of people that have symmetrical faces. Now, I don't know whether that's true. I think there was some study about it, but obviously I think it's also fair to say that as a brand, it's trying to position itself as a platform that is very much on trend. So in the same way that I suppose other brands that covet such data try to then manage their persona and the content people see, I think similarly it's trying to ensure that the content it see is contemporary, is cutting edge, it is trying to engage with the zeitgeist, if you like, and create it as a result of it. So it probably does have an impact on those sorts of things too. But it also may be affected by things that you've told it, like how old you are and what sort of person you are, what sorts of things you like, and all those things will affect what you see.
Amazing. It's so interesting. I just find it fascinating.
It is.
So going back to kind of like sounds then and well the audios, can you explain what kind of it means for a sound to go viral on TikTok?
Yeah, so I guess you're talking about the way in which you can add a specific sound to your video. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think it's there's also a degree of, I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that the entertainment industry has become increasingly wedded to TikTok. And I give you a very simple example, and this is anecdotal, but I think is also probably likely to be some data that can support it. I noticed over the pandemic period, if you listen to the breakfast program on Radio One, you would often hear the presenter Greg James talk about the fact that this song has gone viral on TikTok. And of course, what's important to know is that the producers of radio shows like that and are connected to that entertainment industry that's also part of TikTok's world. So these are not, it's never just one person mentioning TikTok just randomly because they think it's interesting. There is a clear sort of working relationship between these environments. And of course, if you are a media company, you will have invested into utilizing that platform too. So the BBC will have a strong TikTok presence across a variety of its products. So I think there's often sort of the belief that these things just happen out of nowhere and suddenly become viral. And there may well be examples that do that particularly well. But I think what's below the surface is actually a lot of positioning of pieces. I remember there was a TikTok viral song from a couple of years ago, which I have to dig out I followed up the story as to how it became viral, and it was really, I'll find the song for you, but it was the musicians in, I think it was an NME article. They talked about the fact that they seemed to like promote it. They set up like call centers for the song and were doing sort of personalized sort of feedback from audiences about the song, and they were trying to get it to go viral in a very manual way, and then it sort of grew very quickly. So I think there's a lot of background activity that happens below the surface of any given sound that leads it to then become popular, and there's quite a lot of people trying to make that happen rather than just sort of happen. I think it's very appealing as a consumer to think that you've jumped on a trend and that you're then part of that trend and somehow an actor and it becoming popular, like you knew about it before it became like big, and that's a real currency within the environment. But I think it's not a true reflection of what's really happening, that there are in fact nudges towards you seeing certain content that is trying to elevate and therefore becomes popular.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
And there are of course lots of users in TikTok that are doing just that. They are actually trying to jump on trends, and so you have this incredibly big population now that are trying to make stuff go viral and then feel that they're sort of being part of something big. And I think that's also part of the mechanism that makes something grow too.
Yeah, exactly.
And then there's like mysterious stuff. I saw because I guess you're a TikTok user.
Yeah.
And yeah, I wonder. So I mentioned this TikTok research group that we have, and I'm of the view that whilst we all are studying TikTok collectively, each of us has a very different sense of what's happening in the platform, including what's big and what's not. And it's interesting because I saw a TikTok actually yesterday which talked about the biggest TikTok account, so the Charlie account that's been there since the start, and and yet there's some stuff that a colleague of mine who's based in Jerusalem has seen that he considers to be like the content that everyone sees in TikTok, and I'd never seen it. I mean, it's so our sense of what is prominent is very different, and yet we may not be aware of that unless we actually talk outside of the platform about it and realize, oh, what I think is big is not big at all. Like, I'll give you one quick example. Have you seen anything around Greta Van Fleet?
A little bit, yeah.
A little
Yeah.
bit. So I've seen a lot of that. So it was an SNL recording that they did a couple of years ago, 2019, and the song, in my view, has gone really viral for them and doing really well. But I've watched the song as well. I've watched it also on I saw a clip in TikTok. I then went to YouTube and watched the song and watched it a few times. And what you don't really know is how many other behaviors in other products also have an impact on what you're seeing. But certainly, I could quite believe that the amount of engagement I've had with that song in TikTok alone is affecting also my sense of how much content there's created around that particular song. So my impression is, oh, everyone's seen this. This is big. Everyone's experiencing it, and actually, probably not.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think that can be quite scary as well, because you do kind of think it can become a bit of like almost like an echo chamber then, because
Yeah.
you think it's just what you're seeing is what everyone else is seeing, but it isn't necessarily.
Yeah, it is. And that's always been a sort of concern, particularly of the sort of algorithm driven digital age, which is, relatively recent, that we're in this situation where so much of the algorithm affects what we see. And so much about the algorithm is unclear to us, including our perception of its existence, which I think is something that is really obscure to many people. Like, you really don't know quite how it works. You have a sense that it is working, and that's already quite helpful, but you don't really know intervene and disrupt it. Like, I've seen on Facebook over the last few years, people would say that you only see around 25 people's content, and you might have 500 people that you're connected to, but you never see the content of the other 475. And then people try different tactics, like the viral posts that say, if you post this, it will then, or if you like this, then it'll affect your algorithm and you'll begin to see much more content from a range of people. But those also feel like scams and viral things that are then designed. I think one of the things that we don't often think about is the algorithms often designed to get people continuously thinking about the platform, and because of that, it sort of keeps you engaged with the brand of the platform, which I think is a further sort of layer of how we're sort of entrapped into it. But I think that probably what also TikTok does very well that hasn't been done as well on other platforms is how the interface works too. So the scrolling through content in a way that's more, I think, because it's essentially Instagram's tried to do the same with Reels. It's trying to capitalize on the interest people have to always be engaging with video. It's sort of a symbol of the salience of video in people's lives. And you might sort of look back historically and say it's a bit like with your remote control channel hopping, but on steroids. This is how the phrase will go.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. So for this story, I've spoken to a singer in America, and one of her songs went viral on the platform. But for her, she says it happened quite randomly because it was like 2 years after the song was released, and someone else in America had just posted like a video. I don't know if it was like a dance or something to it, and then it kind of took off from there. So I suppose my question really is that could this be seen as kind of a positive thing for people in that industry, you know, as a way to promote themselves? And I suppose, as you said before, these things, it might seem like they happen organically, but they don't. But there are some people who've like launched careers from TikTok because they've had songs go viral, that kind of thing. So yeah, what are your thoughts around that, really, about it being used in that way, I guess?
Well, my first thought is I wonder what happened to the user who made the video dancing to it or whatever it was, because I think that the platform, part of the appeal of the platform is the idea that as a user, you can go viral and you become the content creator then as a result of your amazing sort of either response to a music track or some other piece of content. And I think we are very much in an age where that form of sort of celebrity making is what many young people sort of aspire to. Like I think of YouTubers or streamers. You know, the streamers are becoming personalities themselves, but the real personality is the gaming content. You know, they are the additional layer, but the product is the streamed content. Really, without that, there is no YouTuber. So I think that I mean, celebrity becoming a celebrity has always been a kind of form of myth making. But I think what's appealing to users of TikTok is the belief that if I do something with this piece of content, I can become the celebrity. And it reminds me a bit about some of the early sort of discussions about people like Paris Hilton, the sort of socialites that became famous for being out there invisible. And I think that there's something similar with TikTok by and it's partly connected to, I think, people's belief that at some point your engagement with some creative content may be sort of uniquely or maybe insightful in ways that people haven't quite realized yet, and but you're showing it to them in a way that allows them to appreciate how special it is, and so that you then become this sort of intermediary for status, for value, for things that people didn't realize about something that's out there. And I think that's, again, historically, if you think about it, and the people that I know that are massive sort of music fans and connoisseurs of music will sort of base their status on the belief that they understand music in a way that other people do not, and you kind of share that, and you sort of reveal a sort of insight into something. So I think that in some respects that example that you describe is an example of somebody trying to someone who's had some insight into something that they're then sharing with others to hopefully draw attention to how special it is, but they become then part of that making. It's probably not so different from, actually, if you think back to traditionally how popular music evolved, where you have a sort of a scout, a manager, an A&R that go out and find things. And so today's TikTokers are like the music scouts that go out and find the things that are then brought to people's attention and then defined as special or particularly valuable.
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting. I suppose that almost that kind of like evolution there of how people are just, I suppose, engaging with music, really.
Yeah, and I think that is a big part of it, the musical side of TikTok, which is really interesting because I think that there is such a variety of content in TikTok now, from people that are, either sharing science or anything really. I follow one person that works at one of the museums in London, and she shares videos about history, and I think there is such a variety of content that's out there now, and it's become the catch-all place for all organizations. So it has evolved significantly beyond just the sort of musical, dancing, lip syncing side of things, but that's still such a big part of the ecosystem. And the other thing that we haven't talked about as well is the the sort of live economy within TikTok. And so if you want to go live in TikTok, you have to have 1,000 followers, which is already really interesting, because it then gives people a sort of target to reach in order to really use the platform in full. And I think it is actually the live content that's really significant about the platform. And I don't think I think on YouTube you have to have 100 subscriptions to be able to go live, and there's other sort of limitations like having your own URL in YouTube. You need 100 subscriptions or something like that. But it's then trying to encourage your user community to aspire to being a more fully functioning user, and that's part of the sort of economy of the platform. That it's not just about getting the content into the platform, it's about giving your users targets, goals that they can reach to level up their experience. And I noticed in Google now has a similar sort of principle. I don't know if you noticed, they have a system where you can get points and you can then sort of level up to different things that then may translate into money, I think. But it's trying to engage your user base by getting them to aspire to progressing within the platform. And I think that's an interesting component of it.
Yeah, and so that's something I hadn't really considered, like the live aspect and the requirements. Yeah, that is interesting. And with going back to music for a second, then, do you think there is kind of a danger that, and I suppose it's not just music, it can be across anything really, any kind of medium, that people will be trying to now tailor content more to TikTok to try and get something to trend, or to kind of fit that algorithm, I suppose, if that's even possible. Do you think it kind of has a risk of taking away from like originality if people try to fit in too hard, I suppose?
It's a great question, because again, I want to go back to sort of the history of media production, because the birth, maybe not the birth of radio, but radio certainly created a sort of 3.5 minute track. It was something that was a structure then that artists had to fit into in order for their record to be played. And so I'm a big Prince fan, and I remember that one of the sort of his frustrations with the radio industry was that if you didn't fit in the 3.5 minute sort of category with a song, you wouldn't get your song played. And he would create tracks that would be 7, 8, 9 minutes long, and they wouldn't be heard of because you can't get them on a radio edit. So I think that and the same might be said also of vinyl. The size of the disc limited the duration of your song. So historically, all media production systems have had specific parameters of what's possible. And even if you go back to sort of classical music days in the theatre, and I suppose there's Mozart. So there are some really very old classical compositions where the ring cycle, yes, the ring cycle, I think, is a 12-hour piece, and you go to it over different periods, but it's still set up to be that duration, and it's supposed to be that long. And so there are some situations where you have artists that have in some form sort of pushed back against those restrictions and then sought to create on the basis of what they thought the work requires. But still, there's always, it has to be packaged into 4 nights at the theatre in its modern composition. So I think that it is doing, in that sense, something similar to what's always been the case. But I think what's more likely today is that you have more people around a song that's been created for popular distribution and consumption that are thinking about what component of this song could be used as a 15-second TikTok video. And there's probably a lot more people in the industry that are working to repurpose that content across platforms like TikTok.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Bro, I think that's pretty much all the questions I've
All right.
had, and I feel like we've covered a lot as well. So, yeah, thanks so much. It's been really interesting.